Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on the customer success operations role and why we think it's your next best hire. First and foremost, my colleague Leah and I want to thank you for being here today, for giving up an hour of your day to be with us. We're very excited to be part of Big RYG, and we want to thank our friends at Churn Zero for this great event and for having us. Before we begin, quick administrative note. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the session via the chat feature, and Leah and I will do our best to get to every question at the end. So my name is Andrew Shove. I'm the VP of Customer Success at Quorum. I've been at Quorum for a little over a year now, and before that, I spent the last decade or more leading customer success and professional services teams in the SaaS industry.
And my name is Leah Borland. I lead customer success operations at Quorum. I've been here for about a year and a half. And for a bit of background on our company, Quorum works with public affairs and government affairs professionals, and we provide solutions like grassroots advocacy, stakeholder engagement, and legislative tracking.
So throughout the session, Leah and I will present two different perspectives on the CS operations role. As an executive, my perspective is top down. Why do I think this function is so important to the overall success of the department, and how do I go about enabling that function? Leah's perspective is bottom up. How does she actually go about building and using tools to help advance those bigger goals?
So we'll start off by talking about what exactly customer success operations is, how we define it at Quorum, and then when in an organization's trajectory you might need to add a role like this. Then we'll dive right into some tactics for determining where to begin, how to identify and triage departmental process improvements. And finally, we will end with a case study on how we identified and resolved one of our team's biggest bottlenecks to really drive retention and scaling.
Great. So let's go ahead and get started. First things first, when we say customer success operations, what exactly do we mean, and how do you know when you need it? At Quorum, the customer success operations role owns three distinct yet related functions. That first function you can think of as similar to a plumber. Leah owns the systems integration of the customer success digital ecosystem. Churn Zero is at the core of that ecosystem, but we also use Salesforce, a couple of different support platforms. We use Tableau for analytics. We've got finance software, and kind of a host of other ancillary systems. Having a single owner ensures that the data in those systems is accurate and that the systems work together to help eliminate data silos. The second function is similar to a scientist. With all of these systems, what we end up with is effectively a mountain of data. And it's Leah's responsibility to effectively mine that data and make it available to everyone in the CS team. The final function is really sort of that of an athlete. It's taking the systems and the data and owning the operational improvements that occur across the entire department. So that's sort of the what. The next question, though, is when. When in Quorum's history did we really know or that we needed a customer success operations manager? So for quick background, Quorum has a fairly typical customer success organization. At the time we hired a CS role, we had around 30 people, broadly organized into three functions: account management, support, and expansion sales. Account management had about 20 people, the other 10 more or less evenly distributed between support and expansion. And at the time, we were and we remain a very high growth company. We were onboarding 1 to 2 new customer success people every single month. The product was getting bigger and more complex, and we were taking on a lot of new clients. And we simply couldn't keep up with the demand for process change and for performance insights. What was happening is that every single one of those 30 team members was taking on these sort of specialized projects to address these things. And that sort of decentralized process function worked in the short term, but it didn't work long term, largely because it was creating a lot of waste. It was really hard to distribute lessons learned, and every single person and every project was effectively recreating the wheel. So the big issue here to us was scale. And as I looked at the end of 2019, as I looked at into 2020 and beyond, as periods of increased growth for us, what we knew is that the only way to enable that scale was to bring on a CS ops professional. And that's when we hired Leah.
So one of the first things that I did when I joined Quorum was embark on a listening tour with our CSMs about our team processes. And many of the major qualms or process weak spots that I heard really echoed the notion that we were looking at an increasingly large number of large-scale projects. Our customer success team was finding it really difficult, for example, to access data on renewals and expansion performance. There was concern about a lack of process standardization around key milestones in the customer journey. And finally, what I noticed increasingly, and as a customer success operations manager took personally, was that our CSMs were feeling that they were spending a lot of time and energy on our customer success softwares, but frankly, weren't getting very much out of them. And what's really important to recognize is that when you go to fix some of these problems, when you start to try to scale your customer success department or glean customer insights, almost everything you're doing or trying to do occurs against a backdrop of data sinks. To do something like, for example, trigger an automation or a process at a key customer juncture, you need to have data on that moment occurring coming from somewhere, from Salesforce or a Jira or from your product itself. And when you start to connect those wires, things get complicated pretty quickly. You can see an initial sketch of our data sinks up there on the right. And so I tend to think of this part of the customer success operations role as navigating a messy server room. And the reason a messy server room is a problem is because it becomes difficult and time consuming and requires expertise to get information from point A to point B. As an example, we wanted to find a way to celebrate key client milestones. So if one of our grassroots clients launched a new campaign, for example, we wanted to send them a personalized email saying, congratulations. But you can think of that customer usage data as existing way back there in some yellow wire in the back corner of the server room. And it takes a lot of communication and planning and forethought to get it where you need it, to your automated comm software, which for us was turn zero. And you can think of that as living way over at the front in a blue wire over here. As such, one of the big initial goals of a customer success operations professional that really needs to be owned centrally is turning the messy server room into a very pretty organized server room, so to speak, so that you can have all the information on your customers exactly where you need it. And the point of this isn't just to organize things for organization's sake, but so your team is equipped to act really thoughtfully and intelligently towards every one of your clients, even when the amount of time each CSM can spend per client is shrinking as you try to scale. So all of the process improvements on the right side there that we were hearing a need for were going to be enabled by a clean server room, so to speak, which is basically just having the data where you need when you need it. And that's why, as Andrew said, we say that CS Ops is really three things. It's a plumber, a scientist, and a trainer. First, it's someone making sure the piping works and information gets to where it needs to go. Then it's someone analyzing the information to learn about your customers. And finally, it's someone acting on the insights you learn in the process of that analysis and baking those right into processes.
Great. So once Leah came on board, where did we start? As I mentioned before, we had a lot of projects, but from my standpoint, it was really important that the CS operations role was as strategic as it was tactical. What's really important to me as the department head is being able to identify those 2 or 3 key things that help move the needle most, especially for our retention and our expansion goals. So that was really Leah's charge when she arrived. Go figure out what enables or what moves the needle the most.
So as Andrew said, in the early stages of our customer success operations effort, we had a lot of ideas from team members, and customer success podcasts and such like that. And we went back and forth between addressing the low-hanging fruit and also realizing that there were a mounting number of major bottlenecks that we were really going to need to address eventually. It was kind of a mini version of a multi-armed bandit problem, exploration versus exploitation. So we started off by exploiting, by going after the low-hanging fruit, doing things like improving our reporting infrastructure, making sure we had good data about CSM portfolio size, our expansion pipeline, our churn numbers, our churn reasons. As time went on, though, we needed to find a way to sift through the large-scale process improvements and determine the order in which those needed to be addressed most effectively. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about some of the tools that we incorporated to determine what we really needed to do first. The first tool was running what we called a process productivity audit, where we had every member of our team rate each one of our processes according to the value of the outputs of those processes and the efficiency of our team members' inputs into those processes. We just used a really simple 5-point scale, and these are the real results from our first process productivity audit. And what we did was consider each of the processes to be either priority 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on which category of the grid the process fell in. If it was highly valuable and highly efficient, that's a P4. We don't really need to address it. If it's both invaluable and inefficient, that's something that's on fire and we need to work on it right now. And I personally really like this tool because it's an effective way of harnessing the intelligence and the experience of team members to really drive focus in your process improvement efforts. But once you have those sentiments, we also had to recognize that there was an order of operations in which things needed to be done. Some improvements had to come before others necessarily. So another tool that we relied on was to draw up a process improvement ecosystem, or a pie chart, as I like to call it, which is a list of all the necessary improvements posted in dependency order. And from there, I was able to provide the guidance to Andrew that the thing in the center of it all, the major bottleneck for our team, was the fact that our usage metrics weren't particularly useful. That's really apparent in this diagram because it's the process with the most arrows sprouting out from it and the process it's connected to. Of course, we didn't just take what we saw on the diagram and run with it. This also meshed with a lot of our team's lived experience. We have a complicated product. Our usage metrics were providing basically more noise and less signal.
And so the identification of this bottleneck was really a seminal moment for me as an executive, because it clearly articulated a need that would have a very big result. For us, having a much better sense of our sort of leading indicators, which is what this is about, gives us a much better indication or much better forecasting for just about every portion of the customer success business. And as a department head, one of the things I spend a lot of time doing is sort of allocating finite resources. And the identification of this bottleneck was so important to me because it gave me clear indication of something that really deserved lots of resources and attention. So this process thus became a very big portion of my strategic plan for 2020. So now we've sort of talked about CSOp's role and sort of what it is, and we've talked about how it sort of got us to a plan. So now let's go into the last section of this, which is all about sort of the execution. How do we actually go about sort of moving that needle? Before I turn it back to Leah, let me just give kind of a little more background into this sort of value notion. There's a very big difference for us between using a tool and getting value out of it. And those leading indicators that we talked about, that we identified as the bottleneck, were not our usage metrics, but rather what we were considering our value metrics. The value metrics, or the value propositions for Quorum, are that our clients can map, track, change, and report on their policy landscape. It's really the entire reason our company exists. But before this project, we didn't have any way of quantifying that value attainment, either on an individual client level or in aggregate at the portfolio level. So that's why this leading indicator project was so incredibly important to the health of our business and to my strategic plan for scaling the business?
So when it came to determining value attainment and, as Andrew said, separating that from pure usage, the first thing to do in typical customer success operations fashion was really to set up the plan to get the information infrastructure in place. We were starting with a big imperative to determine which clients were receiving value and which weren't. So we had to break up that problem into basically every possible value attainment pathway in every one of our products. We have 4 core value propositions, as Andrew said, spread across 4 core products and around 10 distinct workflows by which you can actualize value attainment in each. And that brings us to about 160 avenues for value attainment that we really needed to consider and get metrics on. And we went through those pathways pretty methodically, identified the appropriate data points, and ended up working with our dev team to send literally hundreds of metrics over to Turn Zero. From there, we had a really big challenge, which was that we had tons of data, but we wanted that data to result in less work, not more. So it was time to really be an analyst or a scientist and figure out some of the key insights that lied within that data. And so what I did was work with some of our CSMs who are really our product experts at Quorum, and we translated or worked to translate their lived experience into real quantitative determinants regarding exactly which behavior constituted adopting a value prop, exploring a value prop, or really not using a value prop at all. And then we used a bunch of segments in Turn Zero and field automations to mark clients based on where they fell live on a daily basis. So from there, it was time to take those data insights and use them to inform action. This is a bit of a simplification, but once we understood adoption and programmed it right into Turn Zero, we were able to enroll clients and processes based on whether or not they were adopted to their value props and thus at risk. This may seem pretty simplistic, but when you're dealing with tons of clients, you're trying to, as Andrew said, maximize resource allocation. So there's nothing more important than determining who needs extra resources and who you can really spend less time with. So to give you a bit of a sense of how those processes manifested, healthy clients, we enroll them in weekly workflows for our CSMs, and we use those great field automations to provide really high-level insights on value attainment per value prop per product, while also enclosing more detailed usage information on the specific metrics that we brought to Turn Zero in individual column sets. And for our at-risk clients, one of the things that we're able to do is auto-enroll them in journeys that we call save plans, which prompts the CSM to identify the problem and to make a plan to execute on the solution to that problem. And I think what's really important to note is that we're not really trying to automate away CSM insight with these metrics. We're really trying to just push CSMs to the areas in which they most need to apply that insight. So these are just a few of the ways that we were able to improve our processes based on this project.
Great. So the final note for our session today is that it's been our experience that a very close relationship between the CS operations person and the customer success department head is absolutely essential. And it's a very complementary relationship. From my standpoint, my ultimate stakeholders are our clients. And my goal is to ensure that our clients get the value of the tool that they're paying for. Leah's stakeholders are our internal teams, customer success managers, support analysts, me, and her goal is to ensure that those team members have the resources, the assets, and the data that they need to ultimately provide that value to our client. So if you have a customer success operations manager, or if you're thinking about adding one to your team, it's our recommendation that you do so in a way that really aligns that person and the department head. Those two people work very, very closely together. And that's sort of the best outcome. Leah and I talk every single day. It's a very close relationship. And I believe it's one of the reasons that this role has been so successful for Quorum. So with that, we are at the end of our session. I want to thank everyone for being here today. And now we're going to turn it over to questions.
Emily asked a good question that kind of got everyone in the chat talking that I thought we could start with, Andrew, which is, as a current CSM interested in moving into a CS ops position, which skills, courses, certifications would be good to develop skills needed and required for a CS ops role? Is it common for a CSM to move into a CS ops role, or do CS ops managers have different backgrounds? So I can start off with sort of my perspective on this question. I think the CSM background could be so valuable to the CS ops position. I personally do not have CSM background, and I also think technical skills. So I think it's this combination of do you have a close eye on what's happening in the customer success department, the processes, in person. So I think it's first either being able to understand what the customer success managers are doing on the team, either from personal experience or just by talking and having a close relationship with other team members. And then aside from that, the technical skills. And I would say there's a sort of host of technical skills that could be useful for a customer success operations manager. Some like coding skills, being able to navigate an API are really helpful. But I would say the number one thing that has been helpful to me in my time as a customer success operations manager is sort of like what I would call software hacking skills. And I don't mean like hacking in the cybersecurity sense, but more so in just being able to manifest the team processes that you want in the software that you have. Oftentimes, the way a software is set up, the way it structures workflows won't be 100% ideal for what your team wants and needs. But being able to find walkarounds for that is really crucial and really important based on the features that you're given in the software, such as Turn Zero, such as Salesforce, or really anything like that. Andrew, do you have any thoughts for what you look for?
Yeah, and just to answer one of the questions I saw come in, I think this is such a new enough role kind of in the industry that there isn't sort of a standard either trajectory out of the role or sort of into the role, meaning there isn't a standard process where CSMs move into this role and this moves into CSMs. I think you're kind of seeing it all over the place, that most organizations are probably having this role for the very first time, which is really exciting. I think certainly, someone in a CSM position would be a really good fit for this role if they have some of the other sort of technical capacities. I think that one thing that's really important for this role is an appreciation for mathematics and data science. I mean, this is a highly quantitative role, especially at Quorum. And if we're pulling in a lot of data, and Leah, I mean, a ton of the work that you do isn't just the system sort of hacking and bringing the systems together, but okay, now we're pulling all the data out. How are we finding those sort of instances of information that we need to act on? And you've done a lot of very significant sort of statistical analysis to come up with those. So I think having either a sort of high intellectual capacity for statistics and analytics or a background in that is also really advantageous to this role. If that's not sort of the mindset that you have, someone might struggle doing the more sort of advanced components of the role.
I would say that I'm a big believer that sort of anyone can learn those skills that they need to. I certainly learned them on the job. I graduated with a political science degree, so I don't necessarily have a background in that, but I took a few Coursera classes and just through basically trying to find stuff on the internet was able to develop those skills over time. So I think for anyone who's interested, anything from like the Tableau visualizations that we showed to some of the data analytics we did in Salesforce or outside of these programs is totally accessible to anyone who wants to learn. Let's see. I think there were a few questions essentially around compensation, variable versus base comp, and also Yuman's asked the question here: what are the right metrics that you can use to show that the operations person is making a difference or having an impact? Andrew, we've talked a lot about the incentive structure of the CS ops role, tying it to the incentives of the customer success team as a whole. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you view that, and then I can add how I operate within that?
Sure. So just to answer the question directly, the CS ops role at Quorum is effectively compensated along the same lines as are the rest of our account managers or the other functions inside CS. So it is very similar. It is really important to us at Quorum that all of our CS team participates in the revenue retention and the expansion sort of variable compensation. Even our support team, happy clients expand, happy clients stick around. So everyone inside CS on our side has a sort of team-oriented retention bonus and a team-oriented expansion bonus, expansion upsell bonus. Even if your role is more on the sales side or on the customer success account management side or the technical side, everyone sort of participates equally that way, and that's part of the ethic of the way we do things. And the CS ops role is part of that.
Yeah, I would also say in terms of just ways to demonstrate value, one of the things that I was able to do is after we finished up that customer value attainment monitoring project, one of the things that I was able to immediately do is kind of say, here are the clients, the number of clients, the dollars of at-risk clients that we identified using the old system, and here are the clients that we identified using the new system, tracking customer value attainment, and show sort of who fell through the cracks and who we were able to catch more of, given this new system. And that's kind of a tangible way to see value in the short term, and then provide sort of that basis for justifying the long-term impacts and retention and expansion bonuses and so on. Some questions here also regarding operations, where it should live in an organization, and how it should work with other operations functions. Emily here has asked a question. Does your company have a sales ops manager as well as a COps manager? Also some questions about how CS ops differs from a customer success director position. Andrew, do you want to talk about how you see the hierarchy here of customer success ops versus the director role? Then the question of should customer success ops live in customer success or in operations, and how should that collaboration happen? I can speak a little bit after.
We'll go in reverse order. So at Quorum, we do have a sales enablement function. We do have, we use Salesforce. We've got a Salesforce admin who does sales enablement. We also have a director of sales enablement who works more on the training side of our sales teams. We do have this sort of operations function. The CS ops manager lives inside CS. Obviously, Leah reports to me directly. There is a really good question about whether or not, this ops role, even if it's dedicated to customer success or the client side, should it live within that ops function? And that's something we're talking about right now. I think it matters a little bit less where that lives. There's good reasons for it to be within ops. There's some sort of career trajectory and career pathway that's enabled by that. If it's reports directly to sort of the CS manager, then there's some more alignment on that side. So I think it kind of goes either way. I think the broader point is just being really clear about the expectations for the role, where their time should be spent, and what the outcomes of those things are. So even if CS ops at Quorum lives inside the operations piece, the person effectively will be evaluated on like their contribution to CS and basically client performance. So it matters less to me where they live and more about just sort of alignment on the expectations. As far as sort of the relative sort of seniority in the role, it is sort of an interesting role in that it's sort of it doesn't sort of fall. It's a little bit different or a little off than like we have a director of account management that has several managers underneath her, and individual contributors roll up to those managers. Same thing on kind of on the support on the sales side. We've got managers and then individual contributors. This role is unique enough that it's the one place where effectively I have individual contributors who work for me directly. And again, we think that been a really good partnership and it's worked really well, especially early in the role. We've never had this role before. If we had had the role for years and years and years, maybe we'd have it sort of flushed out a little bit more. But since this was the very first time we hired the role, we felt that partnership between like the CS head and this role needed to be like really, really close. And as I said, Leah and I, we talk every single day just about, and Leah and I work together really, really closely to do this.
I think that's certainly really, really important. I think one thing that I would miss if my role lived in marketing or lived in the operations department is just that close proximity to customer success managers. When it comes down to it, doing lots of systems work, lots of data work, but the end goal is to make tangible process improvements for the way our team operates, to make operational improvements. And what I'll say is that I have been wrong more times than I've been right in suggesting particular improvements, but on the whole, our team has gotten better than it has worse. And the way that happens is just by iterating quickly, by like making a guess, going with the process, and then listening very closely to what our CSMs and different practitioners are saying. And that requires a really close relationship with CSMs, with support professionals. And for that reason, I appreciate living in the customer success department. I will say that I do work very closely with our sales ops manager who focuses a lot on Salesforce. So there'd be lots of technical details of like process builder or using different sort of advanced Salesforce tools that I always need help with. We have lots of information coming from our Salesforce instance to our Turn Zero instance. And so we work very closely when it pertains to reporting, when it pertains to expansion reporting, renewals reporting, things like that. I'd love to, there's a little bit of, I see we have 5 minutes left here. There's a little bit of an in the weeds question here that I think is pretty interesting. Mimi asked, can you talk more about how you worked through sort of the problem of creating value attainment metrics, which seems very impressive, but also very daunting? And I can kind of start the answer here, which is that it was definitely a big question of like, okay, we know we don't just want to measure usage and clicks, we want to measure value attainment. How do you find the signal in the midst of that noise? And really, we proposed a few different things. Andrew and I went back and forth on this for a couple of months with different stakeholders in the organization. But essentially, we were able to chunk through the problem in a really simple way, which was just starting with our value props. That was really important to have the leadership within our company to have value props and to have use cases to work off of. And once we had those value props, we were able to say, like, just really simply, within each of those value props, what are all the different things you can do to receive value? And then we just worked, we had a big, I showed the spreadsheet during the presentation of, we just had all the value props, all the use cases, and then different things we thought would measure that. And then we were able to just simply tie those back in our CRM back up to the value props. So it was a really simple process. And once we had all that happening at the account level, you're able to pull that out of Turn Zero. Love Turn Zero live exports, gives me a lot of freedom to build out things in other platforms. And so we were able to transfer that over to Tableau and make fun visualizations like that, which actually wasn't too complicated. But one of the things that we're working on right now is figuring out how to take all that data and then make it effective for Andrew, for other members of our customer success leadership team leads, giving them power to see their portfolios, who's receiving value, who isn't, where is the risk, what's the risk cause, and transferring it sort of into that. Let's see what other questions we have here. In order to measure success, what are the recommended KPIs for a customer success operations role? Andrew, thoughts on this from you?
So the question is, what's the thoughts on the KPIs?
Yeah, KPIs for the role.
Yeah. So the thing that we really looked at, Leo, was sort of efficiency and driving efficiency and scale within the CS team. And that's sort of the biggest metric of enabling, how do we drive dollars under management under the CS team? And that helps. That was sort of the overall metric. Again, that's kind of unique to us, but it was an efficiency metric, right? And that was sort of the primary piece of it. And then I think it's sort of the metrics beneath it get to, things like driving overall process improvement and some other things. But defining an efficiency mechanism was the kind of the first thing, Leah, that you and I sort of set out to do. And that's how we always sort of looked at the objective of your role.
Totally. I would also say there's lots of work to be done down the line with actually contributing to, like I said before, the number of at-risk clients you've identified and helped to save in the role, and also lead gen. So if you have product metrics and you're looking at how customers are using the product, you can actually transition that on the expansion side to lead scoring, to account scoring, and identify accounts that are ripe sort of for expansion. And that's how you can contribute on that. And I think there's actually a lot of ways more down the line that you can build it right into either retention or expansion midpoints. I think we probably have time for one more question here. It looks like we have about a minute and 30 seconds left. Looking through the questions here. Let's see. Jessica asked, do you use customer journey mapping to determine the value attainment metrics? Andrew, do you want to talk a little bit about our customer journey mapping endeavors?
Yeah, so we've gone through also a fairly extensive process to go through customer journey mapping, and we have put those customer journey metrics into our customer journey mapping. So that was also a big part of like the 2020 strategic plan. And so yes, those customer journey metrics and those value attainment pieces of it are a big component of our overall customer journey map.
Yeah, and I will say we had a big internal endeavor around customer journey mapping. We had a few team members own that, talk to people across the company, determine what were the metrics they were using to define success, and how are we connecting the customer journey from marketing, from the top of the funnel down through sales, through the handoff chat to customer success and to product. And that's definitely been really helpful just for us in establishing a vernacular around the customer that we can use across the company. But thanks to everyone for coming to this. Really enjoyed this, and likewise with Andrew. Happy to answer questions after this as well from folks.